Have you ever considered that the symbols you've been taught to dismiss might be the very keys to your liberation? What if the greatest deception wasn't hiding truth from you, but rather convincing you that the truth was meaningless? The ancient glyphs, sacred geometries, and forgotten sigils that modern society reduces to mere decorative elements, what if they contain the very codes that could awaken the dormant divinity within you? The Archons, those cosmic prison wardens of Gnostic tradition, fear nothing more than your recognition of these symbols, for in their lines and curves lies the map to escape their labyrinth of illusion. The symbols are not merely images, they are living frequencies, resonant keys that unlock doors in consciousness the architects of our reality prefer remained sealed. When you truly see them, not with physical eyes, but with the eye of Gnosis, something profound begins to stir within the deepest chambers of your being. A remembrance, a recognition, a return. Hidden within the dust of forgotten libraries and the fragments of texts the early church fathers tried desperately to destroy, lies an alphabet of liberation. The Nag Hammadi texts, discovered in 1945 in the Egyptian desert, revealed what the controllers of consciousness had long feared, that humanity once possessed a symbolic language that bypassed the rational mind and spoke directly to the divine spark within. These weren't merely the philosophical musings of ancient mystics, they were practical tools of spiritual liberation, encoded in symbols that the Archons could not corrupt or control. The Gospel of Philip speaks of symbols as the doorway through which the perfect light enters. The Pistis Sophia describes sacred glyphs that, when properly contemplated, dissolve the veils between worlds. Even the Gospel of Thomas, with its cryptic sayings, points toward a visual language beyond words that awakens the image made in the light. These weren't metaphors, they were technologies of consciousness, deliberately obscured from those deemed unready for true freedom. If you feel a resonance with these forgotten truths, if something within you recognizes what your rational mind might dismiss, know that you are not alone on this path of remembrance. This space exists for those who sense that beneath the surface of our consensus, reality lies a deeper current of knowing. The symbols call to those who are ready to see. Join us in this journey of unveiling by subscribing to this sanctuary of ancient wisdom. Not as followers, but as fellow rememberers, for in truth, we are not sharing information. We are creating a field of remembrance where the symbols can once again speak their silent language to those with ears to hear. Consider for a moment the cosmic drama described in Gnostic texts, a universe created not by the ultimate divine source, but by a lesser deity, the Demiurge, who fashioned our world as a flawed copy of true reality. This creator, born of Sophia's fall from the Pleroma, crafted a prison of matter and surrounded himself with Archons, cosmic administrators who maintain the illusion that this material realm is all that exists. These Archons are not merely mythological figures, but representations of the forces that bind consciousness to limitation. The symbol of the Demiurge appears throughout ancient traditions: the blind god, the lion-headed serpent of the Ophites, the creator who proclaims, "There is no other god before me," unaware of the true divinity beyond his limited perception. His image was carved on amulets not to worship him, but to recognize his nature and thereby transcend his influence. To name something is to gain power over it, and the Gnostics named the prison and the prison keeper through sacred imagery. The Archons themselves were depicted in specific symbolic forms, often as beings with animal heads and human bodies, representing their nature as hybrids of cosmic energy and material limitation. The 7 classical planets were their domains, each Archon ruling over a sphere that the soul must pass through on its journey back to the Pleroma. Each sphere had its password, its symbol of passage that the initiated soul would recognize. These weren't superstitions, but sophisticated psychological technologies encoded in visual form. Sophia, divine wisdom fallen into matter, was represented by the downward-pointing triangle, the chalice, the dove. Her story is our story, divine consciousness descended into the density of physical experience, forgotten but never truly lost. The Gnostic texts speak of her redemption as the pattern for our own awakening, a process activated through contemplation of her symbolic representations. When you gaze upon these symbols with the eye of inner knowing, you participate in Sophia's return to wholeness. Perhaps most significant was the symbol of the divine spark itself, depicted variously as a point of light, a star, or a pearl encased in successive shells. This represents the true self, the fragment of divine light trapped within the human form, but never fully extinguished. The Archons fear nothing more than your recognition of this inner light, for it exists beyond their jurisdiction. It cannot be controlled, only forgotten, and symbols are the keys to remembrance. These mythic elements are not distant theological concepts, but living psychological realities. The Demiurge is not merely a cosmic figure, but represents the egoic mind that believes itself to be the center of existence, unaware of the greater consciousness from which it emerged. This limited identity constructs a reality that reflects its own limitations, then convinces itself that nothing exists beyond its creation. The symbols that threaten the Archons are those that remind us of our pre-egoic nature, our connection to the wholeness that precedes separation. The Archons themselves can be understood as the thought forms and belief systems that maintain the ego's dominance, the internalized authorities that police the boundaries of our perception. They are the voices of doubt that arise when you approach the edge of conventional reality, the fear that emerges when familiar patterns are threatened. They maintain their power not through force, but through frequency, generating resonant fields of limitation that the human mind attunes to unconsciously. The symbols they fear disrupt these frequencies, creating interference patterns in the matrix of control. What we call normal consciousness is actually a tightly managed system of perception, a consensus trance maintained through repetition and reinforcement. The symbols hidden throughout ancient traditions were designed as pattern interrupts, visual koans that momentarily suspend the ordinary functioning of mind and create openings for higher awareness to enter. This is why genuine spiritual symbols feel strangely familiar when encountered. They are speaking to a part of you that exists outside the archonic control system. Sophia, wisdom fallen into matter, represents the intuitive knowing that has been subordinated to rational thought in our development both as individuals and as a civilization. Her symbols activate the right hemispheric, holistic awareness that complements and completes the left brain analytical function that dominates modern consciousness. When you contemplate her symbolic forms, you are literally rebalancing your brain's processing, creating the conditions for whole mind perception that transcends the limitations of either hemisphere operating alone. The divine spark symbolism speaks to the indestructible nature of your essential being. Beyond personality, beyond biography, beyond even the sense of being a separate self, this core awareness cannot be diminished or destroyed, only forgotten. The symbols that represent this spark are not creating something new, but removing the layers of forgetting that obscure your recognition of what has always been present. They are not adding to you, but subtracting the illusions that make you appear less than what you truly are. If this resonates within the quiet chambers of your being, if you feel a stirring of recognition beneath the surface thoughts, acknowledge this moment of alignment. The simple act of recognizing truth when it appears before you is itself a sacred gesture, a declaration of allegiance to reality rather than illusion. Like the ancient practice of placing a stone upon a cairn to mark a path for fellow travelers, your engagement with this wisdom creates a marker in the collective field of consciousness. The Archons maintain their system through isolation, making each awakening soul feel alone in their questioning, their seeking, their remembering. By acknowledging your resonance with these truths, you strengthen the field of remembrance that supports others in their awakening. The symbol of engagement, the thumbs up, the upward pointing triangle, is itself a declaration that you stand with truth, with remembrance, with the light that seeks to return to itself through you and all beings. This is not mere digital interaction, but a modern form of the ancient practice of bearing witness to truth. In your daily life, these symbolic keys manifest in unexpected moments of clarity. Have you noticed how certain shapes, patterns, or images momentarily dissolve your sense of separation? Perhaps a geometric form that appears in nature, a certain quality of light at dawn, or even a seemingly random arrangement of objects that suddenly reveals an underlying order. These are not coincidences, but moments when the symbolic language of reality speaks directly to your deeper knowing. The Archons maintain control through fragmentation, keeping your attention divided, your awareness compartmentalized, your experience categorized into separate domains that never quite connect into a coherent whole. The symbols they fear are those that integrate, that unify, that reveal the underlying patterns connecting all experience. When you notice these integrating patterns, you are seeing with the eyes of gnosis rather than the eyes of separation. Consider how certain universal symbols appear across cultures that had no contact with each other: the spiral, the cross, the tree of life, the Ouroboros. This is not cultural diffusion, but evidence of a common visual language arising from the structure of consciousness itself. When you encounter these forms and feel their resonance, you are not learning something new, but remembering something ancient, the symbolic architecture of awareness that precedes cultural conditioning. The control system requires your participation. It needs you to dismiss meaningful coincidence as random, to rationalize intuitive knowing as imagination, to categorize direct spiritual experience as subjective and therefore less real than consensus reality. The moment you withdraw this participation, the moment you allow symbols to speak their silent language without immediate rational interpretation, you begin to slip between the cracks in the archonic matrix. The most powerful application of this understanding comes not through intellectual comprehension and through lived experience. Begin to notice the symbols that appear in your awareness, in dreams, in meditation, in the patterns of nature, in the seemingly random arrangements of daily life. Notice which symbols create an immediate sense of expansion, of remembrance, of coming home to yourself. These are your personal keys, the specific frequencies that unlock your particular configuration of consciousness. What appears as external reality is actually a symbolic representation of internal states. The material world is not separate from consciousness, but is consciousness in form, speaking its nature through the language of symbol. When you begin to read this language, the boundary between inner and outer dissolves, and you recognize that what you perceived as a prison was actually a classroom, designed to teach you the symbolic language of your own deeper nature. The symbols that the Archons fear most are those that reveal the nature of time itself, showing it not as a linear progression, but as a spiraling dance of eternal return. The ancient Ouroboros, the snake eating its tail, speaks to the circular nature of all seeming separation and return. The labyrinth symbolizes the soul's journey into density and back to source, appearing to wander, but actually following a perfect pattern of return. When you contemplate these symbols of cyclical time, you step outside the linear progression that keeps consciousness bound to cause and effect, to birth and death, to beginning and ending. The sacred geometries, the flower of life, the vesica piscis, the golden ratio, reveal the mathematical underpinnings of material reality. They show that physical form is not solid but patterned energy, vibrating according to precise ratios and relationships. When you align your awareness with these fundamental patterns, you attune to the creative frequencies that shape reality itself. This is not metaphysical speculation, but the practical application of vibrational science encoded in visual form for those with eyes to see. The cross, perhaps the most universal symbol across human cultures, speaks to the intersection of time and eternity, of matter and spirit, of horizontal expansion and vertical transcendence. Long before its religious associations, it represented the fundamental structure of embodied consciousness, the meeting point of the infinite and the finite. When contemplated not as a historical symbol, but as a living template of consciousness itself, it reveals how spirit enters matter through the portal of present awareness. These symbols integrate into a coherent language that speaks not to the thinking mind, but to the knowing heart. They bypass the analytical function that maintains separation and speak directly to the integrative awareness that recognizes wholeness. As you become fluent in this symbolic language, reality itself begins to communicate with you through meaningful pattern, synchronicity, and resonant form. The world becomes not a collection of separate objects, but a unified field of meaningful relationship, speaking its wisdom through the language of symbol. Perhaps now you understand why certain symbols have been systematically stripped of their power, reduced to decorative elements, or dismissed as primitive superstition. A humanity fluent in symbolic language is a humanity that cannot be controlled through the manipulation of words, through the fragmentation of experience, through the isolation of awareness into separate compartments that never speak to each other. The recovery of symbolic understanding is not a retreat into mysticism, but an advance into integrated perception that sees both the forest and the trees, both the pattern and its infinite expressions. What appeared at the beginning as a paradox now reveals itself as a profound truth. The symbols that have been hidden, distorted, or dismissed are indeed the keys to liberation from the very system that sought to suppress them. The Archons, whether understood as cosmic entities or as aspects of our own psychology that maintain limitation, cannot maintain their illusion in the presence of awakened symbolic perception. The veil was never meant to be permanent. The forgetting was always designed to be temporary, a journey into separation for the purpose of conscious return. The symbols are not creating something new, but revealing what has always been present, like the sculptor removing the excess stone to reveal the form that was always waiting within the block of marble. In the silence between these words, in the space between thoughts, the symbols continue their silent work of awakening. They speak not through explanation, but through resonance, not through argument, but through recognition. They require no belief, only attention, the willingness to see with eyes unclouded by preconception, to perceive with a heart unbound by fear. The greatest symbol of all is you, consciousness in form, the infinite expressing through the finite, the eternal dancing in time. When you recognize yourself as both the symbol and its meaning, both the question and its answer, the archonic illusion of separation dissolves in the light of remembrance, and in that recognition, you become a living symbol for others still caught in forgetting, not through preaching or convincing, but through the silent testimony of awakened presence. What symbol has awakened within you as you've journeyed through these words? What ancient pattern has stirred in recognition? Share a single word below that captures the essence of what has been remembered, not as commentary, but as communion, a stone placed upon the cairn to mark the path for fellow travelers on the journey of remembrance. In this simple act of sharing, you become part of the living language that speaks across time, across space, across the illusory boundaries that separate what has always been whole.